Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and welcome to an episode of Cheap Shots, the ultimate series for miniature wargamers who want stunning tabletop qualities without breaking the bank. In this series we'll show you how to save money on your miniatures painting hobby by using affordable craft paints, budget-friendly tools, and clever techniques. Whether you're a beginner or a seasoned hobbyist, you'll learn how to achieve incredible results without the premium price tag. And before we get started, I will have to admit that inflation has finally struck the cheapskate nation. Unfortunately, I was out buying some craft paints for a future video that I wanted to do on my channel. I was actually shocked to see that the same old prices that I used to use in order to pay for my craft paints have actually increased because inflation has pretty much hit my craft paints now. So because of that, I did have to change the prices on a lot of the materials that I've used. So let's go and talk about what some of those changes are right off the bat. So first of all, my apple barrel paint actually went from 50 cents now to 58 cents at my local Walmart, so about an 8-cent difference, so not so bad. However, the really biggest impact were the paints that I used from Hobby Lobby. My Americana paint as well as my folk art paint actually had quite a huge difference in price. Folk art from Hobby Lobby went from 75 cents to $1.17. Americana went from 65 to 99, and Anita's acrylic, which is the most significant one, went from 65 cents to $1.99. So needless to say, I will be scaling back my Anita's acrylic paint because that's a little too pricey for me. At the same time, other hobby materials I use like Krylon sprays for both spray paint as well as for matte varnish, I went from $5.99 to $6.43. Midwax polyacrylic went from $6.99 that I usually get at Walmart to $7.99, and Rust-Oleum sprays also jumped up from $3.99 to $5.89 at my local Walmart as well. And pretty much the price differences have increased from anywhere between 13 to 206% in increase in price for some of the materials that I use. But even though this is quite drastic in my point of view, it's still significantly cheaper by far than stuff that you'll have to buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter as well. So for example, we're going to talk about that today with our latest cheap shot videos. And on today's episode, we're going to show you guys how to paint up a squad regiment of Beastmen Ungors for your games of Warhammer the Old World. As you can see, this is the end result that we will achieve with our miniatures. And when you compare this to the materials that you need to buy from Citadel as well as Army Painter, you're going to talk about a grand total savings of $131.72. In fact, if you're buying the materials from Citadel as well as Army Painter that you would have to use for the equivalency for cheap craft materials, it's going to cost you $165.65 for those materials. And my cheapskate method, even with the inflated price because of inflation, comes out to $33.93. So like I said before, a huge difference of $130+ being saved. So even though I am finally being hit with the inflation stick, it's really not all that bad, all things considered. So this video will feature 20 Ungor that I actually bought these Ungor secondhand from a guy at my local game store. This guy was actually an old Beasts of Chaos player from Age of Sigmar, and he was actually selling his miniatures for quite a significant discount. In fact, I was able to buy most of my 3,000 point Beastman army for this guy for around $125, so it was an absolute steal. So as you can see, these miniatures have already been assembled and already primed for the most part, so because I pretty much skipped this step. But if I was to do it, of course, I would still assemble my miniatures the old-fashioned way. I would still put them on bases. In this case, this guy used those really fancy texture bases from Age of Sigmar, so I decided to stick with those. But if I weren't textured, I'd use my same wood glue and sand method as well, and I would still use Rust-Oleum flat black primer, which costs $3.98 in order to prime these miniatures. Now, I'm not really sure what to use to prime these miniatures with. If I had to guess, probably some name brand primer, maybe something like, I don't know, like some whatever gray color that the Games Workshop guys use, but I would never use that. But in this situation, though, I would use Rust-Oleum flat white primer. Now, primer does actually a couple of things that's quite important for miniature painting, and it creates a surface for your acrylic paints to adhere to, so that way they stick to your model. Otherwise, if the slightest bit of friction would just rub the paint right off your miniature and ruin the finish of your miniature as well. At the same time, priming also has an important impact on the vibrancy of the colors that you put in your miniature. And looking from this guy used kind of like a light gray, kind of off-white color, so it still works out for our painting scheme. So the very first thing we're going to do in the miniatures, of course, is to paint the hindquarters for a majority of these miniatures, as well as all the wood elements these guys are carrying as well. And for the color I like to use for this is Apple Barrel's Burnt Umber. It costs 58 cents at my local Walmart. Get this stuff pretty cheap still. I put two thin coats on all the hindquarters I wanted to have like a dark brown color. Same thing with all the bows, as well as the arrows, as well as any kind of wooden kind of weapons you're carrying, like clubs, for example, as well as the handle of the standard bearer. Just put two thin coats and we're ready to move on. Now, because I want to add some color variety to this unit as well, I decided to paint the fur of these guys in various different colors. So first of all, I use Anita's acrylic moccasin brown, and the paint color that I used for that was, that color actually comes out to about $1.99. So unfortunately, that Anita's acrylic, man, it really took a huge jump from 65 cents to $1.99. So do not expect to see Anita's acrylic in my videos after a while, after a certain point, because I probably won't go back to buying those anymore. I'm just going to use it whatever I have now and not replace those colors. For the other guys, I decided to do 3 of these guys in pavement paint as well as the other 3 guys in pewter paint, and both those are from Apple Barrel Paint, and those cost 58 cents a piece for those. That's just getting used to saying how the price changes are different. It's so horrible. Now that we're done talking about all the fur, let's go and talk about exactly what we did for the flesh tones. So for a couple of my guys, I wanted a pale flesh color. Usually I would normally go with Delta Sarin Coat Peaches and Cream, but this time around I wanted to go with a little bit of a cheaper paint, so I went with Folk Arts Hazy Moon. It costs $1.17 at your local Walmart, so I decided to use that to kind of paint up the miniatures as well for their faces as well as for their torsos. For a large majority of them though, I did paint them up in Folk and Apple Barrel's flesh tone. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 58 cents as well. And then for the guys who wanted a darker skin tone, I actually used Nutmeg Brown by Apple Barrel Paint, and that also costs another 58 cents as well. If you notice, a couple of these guys have like this purplish color fur on the miniatures. The reason why I have that color is because that was the original color that the original owner of these miniatures was actually starting, and I decided to keep them just because it was already done for me, so you know, why reinvent the wheel? And secondly, it's kind of like an homage for the guy that I bought these miniatures from. Now in this next step, I wanted to elevate the look of my Ungor Beastmen, and what I wanted to do is I wanted to paint them with war paint is what I decided to do on this one, because I thought they were kind of like mono looking and kind of boring looking when I got done painting them. Unfortunately, I didn't think of putting war paint in my miniatures until actually I started painting my Ungor unit, and now that I did it, I'm kind of sad that I didn't do that for all my Beastmen. I think the Beastmen would look really cool with this war paint, but you know, hindsight's 2020, so c'est la vie. Anyways, I was inspired by the movie Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and they show the kilts in one of the climatic battle sequences in that movie, and that's where I got the idea from. So I used 3 main colors for most of the paint, for the war paint for these characters. For about a third of this regiment, I used green turquoise by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 58 cents. I did another third in Holly Branch, also 58 cents, made by Apple Barrel Paint, and the last third I did in Bright Blue by Apple Barrel Paint, also 58 cents as well. As you can see, these colors contrast very nicely and complement with the earth tone colors of these warriors, and it's just very eye-catching and really awesome looking at the exact same time. And once we got done with painting up all of the different fur that we have for these guys, the next thing I decided to do was actually to paint up some of the leather goods on these characters as well. And I also decided to actually change up my paint scheme a little bit. What happened was that as I was painting these guys, I realized that some of these characters, I actually wanted to paint their fur a different color, just to add a little bit more color variety. So for some of these guys, I actually painted their fur in pewter gray by Apple Barrel Paint. Kind of started all over again for some of these guys, just because I wanted to add some more color variety to the regiment. But for the leather goods that these guys are carrying, so things like their belts, for example, wrappings that they might have on their person, I decided to pick those out 2 different colors. Some of these guys I picked on Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paint, costs about 58 cents at your local Walmart. I used that for characters who had like really dark colored war paint or really dark colored fur, so that way you would contrast with the darker colors. For the warriors that I did in a lighter fur color or a lighter skin tone, I used Pavement Paint by Apple Barrel Paint as well, so that way you can contrast those leather goods quite nicely and you could actually see that detail. So the next detail I started painting next were some of the finer details on these miniatures, things like the cording of their weapons as well as the cording around their wrists. These guys are wearing like these wraps around their wrists as well as their grips of their weapons as well as their shields, and I wanted to bring out those colors and kind of go with that same war paint color that I used and kind of alternate it to create some more color variety in this regiment. So the 4 colors I used was Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel Paint, as well as Green Turquoise, Holly Branch, as well as Bright Blue. All 4 of these are made by Apple Barrel Paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for 58 cents. And as you can see, it creates a lot of color variety throughout the entirety of the regiment, so it makes it very eye-catching as well. At the same time, I also use Holly Branch on the banner that these Beastmen are carrying as well. And if you notice on the banner, I just made it into a simple, solid color, just because Beastmen are not exactly renowned for their artistic ability. I just imagine they just kind of take different colored cloth and just kind of use it for their banners because it's simple and it's easy, eye-catching, and you know, that's what something that Beastmen would do, at least in my imagination. Another color I decided to also pick out details with are all the bone materials for these characters too. So things like their horns, for example, skulls, fangs, bits of bone they might have hanging on their equipment or on their belts. So for that color, I used 2 thin coats of light mocha by Apple Roll paint. You can get this at your local Walmart for about 58 cents. And just pick out all those details. As you can see, it contrasts quite nicely with the flesh tones as well as the war paint that these characters are wearing. So one of the colors I decided to pick out individually, however, was on the grips of the standard bearer. I decided to focus on the cording on the handle as well as the links of cording that are holding the skulls to the banner as well. I wanted to contrast with the rest of the color of the banner as well and kind of be like its own little eye-catching color and its own little eye-catching detail. So to create that look, I used Delta Cerancoat's Mermaid Blue. This is a color that you get at your local Walmart for about $1.65. That price increase is really rough. But anyways, so that was the color I used in order to pick out that detail. Now, if you notice, I haven't done any dry brushing during this phase, and the reason why is because typically speaking, whenever I paint up miniatures, what I like to do is once I do my base coat, I like to dry brush it with a pastel color of some sort, so that way it creates that illusion of depth. However, I had 20 of these guys, and to be perfectly honest with you, I was feeling kind of lazy, so I didn't really want to actually use all the different colors to dry brush these. So I decided to do an all-over dry brush over all the miniatures with Pale Gray by Folk Art. You can get this at your local Walmart for about $1.17 at your local Walmart as well. And I just dry brush the entirety of the miniatures with this pale gray color. Dry brushing is a nice detail to use on your miniatures because what it does is it creates the illusion of depth in your miniatures. The pigment of the paint actually adheres to the raised surface of the miniature while leaving those darker colors in the recesses. Now, I could argue that I did this to make them look like they're kind of dusty and kind of grimy and kind of dirty, but really I was just being lazy. I know that basically once I do my oil wash, the oil washer will stain this dry brushing as well, and it'll kind of create this kind of muddied, kind of dark effect on the guys, and so that's why I did it. I was just feeling lazy and I didn't feel like individually dry brushing everything. I mean, I am kind of a cheapskate that way. So next detail we're going to paint up, of course, are the metallic elements on these miniatures, and the main color we use for a lot of the spear points of their arrows, as well as some of the weapons and blades that they have or that they're carrying. We decided to use Folk Art's Gunmetal Gray for $1.17. You can get this at your local Walmart. Wonderful, great gunmetal color. It's really cheap. It applies well. It looks good as well. And I just put in all the parts of the miniatures that I wanted to be silver. And the very last metallic element we decided to work on were the bracelets. Some of these characters are wearing like these really cool arm greaves or arm rings with some of the metallic elements. I kind of alternated the colors between both copper as well by Folk Art, which costs $1.17 at your local Walmart, and Deco Art's Emperor's Gold, which now costs 99 cents. I just picked out those details that I want to be copper and gold and just kind of alternated between them. So things like the belly plates that they have and the buckles for their belts, the wrist guards that they have on their wrists, the hilt of some of their weapons. Some of these characters are wearing jewelry. So I just picked out those details that want to be those alternating colors, and we move on. So now that we're done painting the majority of the miniatures, the next thing we're going to focus on are on the bases. And like I said before, the original owner of these miniatures actually mounted these guys on the 25 and 20 millimeter round bases for Age of Sigmar, which is the really cool textured, I'm not sure what they're called, but it looks like it's like masonry and like old ruins. It's got skulls and things like that built into them. I thought those bases were really cool, and I really didn't feel like rebasing all my miniatures on the official 25 and 32 millimeter square bases because I'm a cheapskate. I'm not going to spend money on bases. I'm just not going to do it. It's just that simple. So because I decided to bring out those details in 2 thin layers of Tuscan Teal by Apple Barrel paint because I want to create this kind of aged blue kind of ruined look on the bases. And after I got done toning my base coat, I dry brushed them in Dutch Aqua by Folk Art. You get this color at your local Walmart for about $1.17, and it brings out a lot of those details so you can see the cracks in the masonry. You can see the bas relief of the carvings on the miniatures as well. Not to mention this kind of turquoisey kind of aqua color contrasts nicely with all the browns as well as the earth tones that I have on this regimen. At the same time, it also complements the blues and the greens that we have for the war paints. It just looks very eye-catching and very cool looking. And the very last detail we're going to pick out on these bases are the skulls. So a lot of these bases actually have skulls embedded into the basement of the ruins of these figures. So in order to pick out that detail, just put 2 thin layers of light mocha by Apple Barrel paint on those skulls. And now that we're done with that, the next step is to do an oil wash. So the very next step, of course, is an oil wash. Now, when it comes to the oil washing stage, a lot of people like to use Army Painter Strong Tone in order to achieve this result and to achieve this look. There's nothing wrong with that. Army Painter Strong Tone is a wonderful product that does exactly as advertised. The only problem, though, is that Army Painter Strong Tone costs $32 a can, so it's quite expensive. Whereas a can of Midwax Polyshade Acrylic and Mission Oak only costs $7.99 at my local Walmart, which is almost a fifth of the price. So I use that instead because it does exactly, well, not exactly the same thing, but it is something that's very similar to that. The Mission Oak color, what it does is it does a couple of things. The first thing the oil wash does, it actually seeps into the recesses of the miniatures and brings up a lot of the details we couldn't see earlier when we were actually painting our miniatures. So things like the individual grains of the fur, the gaps, the musculature, as well as like the cracks and the crevices of the bases they're standing on, the folds of their fabric. It brings a lot of those details out by leaving that darker color in the recesses. The second thing that the oil wash also does too is it smooths out the transitions between our dry brushing as well as our base coating. As you can see, that chalky gray is now gone on these miniatures because that oil wash has pretty much kind of stained it, for one, to make it a little bit darker, and secondly, it smoothed out those transitions by blurring the dry brushing and the base coating together to create a more organic look as well. The very last thing the oil wash also does too is it also darkens the value of the colors that we use on these miniatures. As you can see, the colors are not as bright and technicolored and vibrant as they used to be. They're more subdued and more organic looking, and that's exactly the kind of result we wanted to achieve with these guys. Now, of course, the oil wash does need to take 24 hours for it to dry and cure because it is a wood stain, and it also has polyurethane in it as well, which means you'll have a nice high gloss protective finish on these miniatures, which will protect them from fading and chipping and all that kind of stuff. But you do need to wait 24 hours for that stuff to dry and cure. So my suggestion, whenever you do your painting, do this as the very last step of your painting process and leave it alone until the next time you get back to work on it again. So 24 hours has come and went, and so now we're actually focusing on the rim of the bases. Now the rim of the bases, I used 2 thin coats of Territorial Beige by Apple Barrel Paint, and the reason why I use that color is for 2 reasons. One, the Territorial Beige actually contrasts quite nicely with the bases that we're using, so that has that nice little contrast there between the teal of the bases as well as the Territorial Beige. At the same time, it also kind of complements the colors that we've used already on our miniatures as well. And the second reason why is because one other army in my studio's collection uses this Territorial Beige rim on the bases, which is my Wood Elf army. And so I like to think that Beastmen and Wood Elves are make natural enemies, and I thought it'd be kind of cool they had the same kind of base color, and that's the reason why I picked that color to do it. The very last step we're going to use on these miniatures, which is a completely optional step, is to spray these miniatures down with a matte varnish. I like to use Krylon matte varnish spray. It costs $6.43 at my local Walmart, and the reason why is because I don't like that high gloss sheen that the polyurethane leaves behind. So I just do a quick dusting of that. As you can see, it has a much more matte finish. You can see a lot more of the details without that high gloss candy coated look on the miniatures. On the other hand, if you do like that high gloss candy coated look, you could completely skip this step and it'd be totally unnecessary for you. But for me though, I like a matte finish, and so with that, these miniatures are now completed. So as you can see, these miniatures have a beautiful tabletop finish, and they're ready to go throwing it down onto the tabletops of Warhammer the Old World to pillage, loot, destroy, and burn in the name of the Chaos Gods. So now that we're done talking about exactly how our cheapskate method was used to paint these miniatures, let's go and talk about the products that you'll need to buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter to achieve similar results that we did, but using those name brand paints instead. Alright, so this is the list of materials that you need to buy from both Citadel as well as Army Painter if you want to achieve similar results as we did, but using those name brand paints instead. You'll need to buy Teardown Turquoise, which is $7.80 for that product, as well as Thunderhawk Blue, Bane Blade Brown, Teclis Blue, Caliban Green, and those are going to cost you $4.55 for those colors. You'll need to buy a Pot of Wildwood, which costs you $7.80, as well as Bugman's Glow, Cadian Flesh Tone, Baylord Brown, Slanesh Gray, Eshin Gray, and those are going to cost you $4.55 for those. Talazar Blues going to cost you $7.80, while XV88 costs you $4.55. You also need to buy Lead Belcher, Screaming Bell, those are going to cost $7.80 for those. Ulthuan Gray for $4.55. Aethermatic Blue for $7.80, Wraithbone for $4.55, Retributor Armor for $7.80, and if you decide to use an oil wash, you'll need to buy a can of Art Painter Strong Tone for $32. And if you decide to put a matte varnish on your miniatures, you need to buy a can of Munitorium Varnish for $24. Now, assuming that you're purchasing everything from Citadel as well as Army Painter for the very first time, you're talking about a grand total investment of $165.65 to paint your miniatures the same way we did with similar results, but using Citadel as well as Army Painter instead. Now, if you take our cheapskate method, which is a grand total of $33.93, and you subtract it from the Citadel as well as Army Painter method, you're talking about a grand total savings of $131.72. So there you guys have it. If you're looking for a way to save money for your miniatures and achieve a very beautiful tabletop standard for them as well, may I suggest using cheaper craft paints from Walmart as well as Hobby Lobby to achieve similar results and only as a fraction of the price. And as you guys saw at the very beginning of my video, the inflation monkey has basically hit me with its baseball bat, and so now because of that, I do have to pay more for my paints. But even though I am paying an inflated price for my cheap craft paints, it's still a heck of a lot cheaper than Army Painter as well as Citadel paint. I mean, some of my paints went up from like up to 200% in some of my paints, and they're still significantly cheaper. And at the same time, you also get more of them too. We're talking about 2-ounce fluid bottles here, not the whatever millimeter amount that you get from Games Workshop and Army Painter. Well, there you guys have it. That's how you guys cheaply paint up your guys' Beastmen Ungor for your games of Warhammer the Old World. As always, please feel free to like, comment, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. And that's good for this week, guys. I will catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.